All right, welcome to another episode of Up Next. And Up Next is Resource Global's podcast. For all of you guys, we're actually recording today for both Resource Global, our cohort of young marketplace leaders in Jakarta, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Nairobi, Austin, and Chicago, in which both Elmer, our guest, and Trisha has been involved in. And then from that point on, we're also interviewing for Chicago Navs, that this will be shared with the network of marketplace leaders and volunteers with Navigators in Chicago, which both Elmer and Pastor Ephraim Smith has been board members of. Let me actually introduce our board members right here. We have Trisha Felice, who is a partner of Redmark Group. From that point on, we have Elmer Ha, who is the Chief Investment Officer of the Murdoch Charitable Trust. Before that, he was a senior manager of Ernst & Young. And from that point, we have Pastor Ephraim Smith, co-lead pastor of Bayside Church in Sacramento. And before that, he was the president and CEO of World Impact Missions. And so actually, I'm going to actually ask all three of you guys, and I'm going to start with Pastor Ephraim Smith. How is the situation with COVID-19 affected your church and all the things that you guys are doing? And how have you guys responded as a church in what you guys are doing in Sacramento? Pastor?
Well, definitely, because Bayside Church, Midtown in Sacramento, we're a center city church. We're a very diverse congregation. And, traditionally and even presently, urban churches are really into getting together, especially when you're as culturally, ethnically, racially diverse as we are. There's something significant about getting together and building community, serving cross culture, cross ethnicity, cross race, etc. So when you lose that opportunity to gather in that way, it is significant. But we have totally moved from an on-site church to an online church. But yet, through online connection and even going old school like a phone, can you imagine that? So by going so old school, we've been able to still build community, and we are continuing to be missional in Sacramento and beyond. We have partnered with another church in our community. We have a portable shower trailer, and every day homeless people are receiving personal showers with dignity, and we're feeding them and trying to connect them to other social services. So we're an online church, but we're also working to continue to be a missional church, even in the midst of the shelter in place because of COVID-19.
Got it. Hey, Pastor, for some of you guys, I live in Chicago, Trisha's in Chicago, and Elmer's in Vancouver, Washington. Tell us about Sacramento. Give the audience a view for those who are listening from different parts of the world. What is Sacramento like?
Well, Sacramento is the capital city of the state of California, and it's significant because it's also one of the most multicultural, multi-ethnic cities in the United States of America. Of course, in California, Los Angeles and the Bay Area usually get most of the love. I mean, that people think of the tech industry in the Bay Area, they think of Hollywood and, celebrity and reality shows in LA. And, Sacramento's the political mecca of the state. It's also, again, very, very diverse. But on any given weekend, only 10% of people in Sacramento go to church. So it's a significant mission field and opportunity for the church if we're willing to be rooted, but also be flexible when it comes to the way in which we deliver ministry to people.
Got it. Hey, Trisha, let me turn to you. You live in Chicago. You work in Chicago. You're currently talking to me from Ohio. And how is your business? Because over at Redmark, you're a strategy and growth consulting clients. Has work been busy right now? What's work been like for you?
Yeah. You know what? It's very different. Just temperature within, we work with mostly small and medium-sized businesses. So as you might imagine, they're all dealing with this, the COVID crisis. It's a hard time for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. We've been having a lot of conversations with companies about how to communicate to the marketplace right now. Consumers are dealing with the COVID crisis and dealing with companies in a different way than they did in a pre-COVID world. I really like something that Pastor Ephraim mentioned about being missional as a church. And that same type of mentality can carry over into the for-profit corporate world. How, as a company, do you look at what your customers are dealing with right now? And how can you serve them, even from your for-profit, the value proposition of your for-profit company? How can you begin to change your thinking from business as usual into this post-COVID world? Because those ramifications and what you're building up in a company are going to serve you better long-term with those customers. So there's a lot of the same kind of mentality that I think can parallel between a faith place and a for-profit place.
Got it. Are you finding that a lot of times the businesses that you're working with, are they responding fast, or are they struggling to know how to respond in this situation to their clients and things like that?
That's a great question. I would say a lot of it varies in the type of company that it is. There's been a lot of communication. Many companies are getting out front of it and communicating a lot more with their customers, but also questioning how much is too much. If we are a lamp company, do we need to be hitting our customers with, multiple emails every week? Or how do we still stay true, as was said before, kind of rooted and flexible, rooted in what we are as a company, but flexible because being authentic in that is recognizing what's happening in the world at large and kind of where your value proposition fits into that.
Got it. Elmer, you're the Chief Investment Officer of Murdoch Charitable Trust. Before that, you were in Ernst & Young. Talk about what's going on, even with the investments on the foundations, is what's going on across the fronts economically. What are you guys seeing in terms of investments?
So I would guess, to piggyback off of what Tricia and Ephraim was saying, is that, the key thing is being missional and being proactive and being really up to date in engaging with people. I think we have an opportunity, and my colleague and I, we manage the foundational assets, and there's about 35 managers. And I'd say about 20, 28, maybe 30 of them are very active. We've been very encouraged. A lot of the things that Tricia just said about the small businesses with the great management teams, as everyone should know, that small businesses make up a very, very significant part of the workforce in this country. And it should be no surprise when small businesses get exposed and are at risk. The numbers economically don't portend well for future quarters. And we don't manage our portfolio on public equities per se, but more on alternatives. We're a little bit more of a aggressive portfolio. We have venture capital and private equity, but in our teams, team meetings with our managers, we're getting the same theme. It's a defensive playbook. It's making sure that our management teams understand where their management teams are, liquidity wise, the health of their employees, the health of their employees' families. So far, it's been a very good news flow for us in terms of interactions with the managers that we've been had some concerns about. Everyone's working remotely, and there's going to be some pain, and there's going to be a lot of, as you see in the news already, a lot of furloughs. We have a conviction in our team here at the trust that things are going to get worse on an economic basis.
Got it.
For the health. The health is going to resume and society is going to resume, but economically, we're going to have a lot of lingering pain. And what that really means is that the small businesses, which don't have the scale and efficiencies of a lot of things, are going to have to adapt. They're going to have to be more innovative. They're going to be challenged in terms of not only running their business profitably, but also being effective leaders for their employees. And this is where that opportunity of being missional comes into play, because I can tell you, just from being locked down for the past month, it's totally different here than it is where we used to live, which was in New York. And understanding our former colleagues and the folks that are in New York, the good people doing healthcare, My wife was a physician in New York. Her whole team has been 24/7 nonstop working on the east side, and it's not pretty. But when you reach out, even using the technology we have now, just to say hi, how are you doing? Tell them and lending them a hand to say you care. It becomes a real life giver, a beacon of hope. And we have 2 teams that I used to manage in India years back, and I reached out to all of them globally, and they were surprised. We haven't heard from each other in 5-6 years, and they were very happy to hear. And you can tell that a lot of people are reconnecting with individuals they haven't talked to in a long time, but have worked with closely. And that really brings a sense where, we may be physically, socially distancing, but we can leverage the technology to be more missional and intentional.
Got it. Tricia, Elmer, later on in a few minutes, I want to talk with you a little bit about funding and giving, all of that stuff. But Pastor, let me ask you a quick question. For those in your congregation, or even in terms of around churches, there are people who are being furloughed. There are people who are being laid off. Suddenly, now the number is escalated to more than 22 million people have applied for unemployment. What is the role of you as a pastor? How do you communicate? What do the people need to hear during this period of time? And how can you best encourage them, for whether it's blue collar workers or people who are trying to figure out what to do with funding? How do you best communicate to them?
Yeah, well, this is a great time for us to revisit the first century church. The first century church were people that were generous, that were kind, that unleashed compassion, and yet they were a marginalized people suffering under the Roman Empire. And so yet a suffering, marginalized, oppressed people, they exhibited such radical generosity and compassion. And so we're trying to remind our community that it's our hour to be those kinds of people. So there are some people in our congregation that fortunately are doing well, in spite of. I mean, they're still receiving checks. They're stable financially. They're not where they want to be, but they're in a stable position. And we're asking those people in that position to be generous and compassionate towards those that are less fortunate in our congregation, because that's how it worked in the New Testament. People were generous to those in need. And so we have people at our church that are going and picking up groceries and delivering them to people that are under-resourced or unemployed in our church. We have people that they're going and taking medicines and groceries to elderly people. And so no matter what season the church is in, we are still called to be mindful of the most vulnerable among us.
Got it. Have you found, even with your sermons, we just passed Easter, what themes are you finding yourself preaching on these days that have been helpful to your congregation?
Right now, we're in a sermon series called Defining Moments.
Yeah.
And so we're helping people, equipping people to understand that life is full of defining moments. Some of those are, when you lost your first tooth and found a quarter under your pillow, when you received your driver's license, when you graduated, when you got married, when you had your first child. There are these defining moments, but there are also some troubling, challenging defining moments. 9/11. Hurricane Katrina, school shootings, violence in synagogues and mosques. And unfortunately, even in those defining moments that are crisis filled, we have to find the opportunities to rise to the occasion, prioritize our relationship with God, prioritize our family, prioritize our neighbors and our friends, be reminded of what's most important so that we can still grow, so that we can still rise up as God's people, even in those defining moments that we wish never happened.
Got it. Tricia, Elmer, both of you guys are, Tricia, you're involved with your family foundation. Elmer, you're involved in a bigger foundation. What is your advice to donors? As ministries are coming to you guys, knocking on the door, all of that stuff, you're inundated with all of these different requests. Is there, from a personal donor or a foundation point of view, would your advice be for donors as they're dealing with all of these requests, seeing all of these different things going on? Tricia, let me start with you.
That's a good question. I think really keeping a long-term perspective of this is something that I play in my mind. Long-term relationships, or feeding relationships that you have right now through a time of crisis can change the relationship and really like deepen what is happening there. So really getting alongside, not just as someone who might be getting requests, but feeding the needs in multiple ways. So having deeper conversations around planning for this, around what a post-COVID plan could look like. I think broadening the conversations in that way is something that is really important in a time of crisis, and has been heavy on my mind.
Got it. Elmer, thoughts?
So I couldn't agree more. I think we, as you know, we specifically partner with nonprofits in the Pacific Northwest, and not surprisingly, we received a number of applications and calls and requests for grants, for emergency stop back purposes and so forth. And I would say, to the good work of our program directors who do that other side of the equation, they're managing the same playbook that we do in our portfolio, which is we try to balance out the very short-term liquidity needs with the long-term perspective in play. And not to get into football purposes here, but there's a defensive playbook and there's an offensive playbook. And some of the most respected economists and consultants and managers that we've been in contact with over the last month and a half and getting updates on our portfolio have implemented, first and foremost, the defensive playbook. Stop the bleeding. Figure out what you need to do to survive. What do you need to do in terms of milestones? And then as you're going through your war room of giving them advice, which is what we do with our program directors to our grantees, is focus on what are the impending needs that you foresee down the road. Do you have enough bandwidth and capacity to do a scenario analysis of worst case scenario versus upside and base case, and think about whether there's going to be a second round of this pandemic come next winter? And so we're in this position where we're coaching them, we're partnering with them, we're investing in the relationship, and most of all, we're doing our best to ask them the hard questions and walk alongside them. That's a very Navigator thing to do. It's a very Murdochish thing to do. Grantees, it's a very Christian thing to do. As Efren was talking about, in terms of working and helping out with the least and the vulnerable, all of us at one point or another are going to find ourselves in challenging situations if we haven't already. And so what we've done from a portfolio perspective is said, take our cash now in terms of our lines of credit, because we know that we will be facing some liquidity during the summer. It may seem really bad now, but it will get worse later. And if it doesn't, great. But the upside of that is much better than dealing with the downside. And so you help, if you're doing that on one side of the equation, which is the investments, you have to do it on the other side of the equation, which is the granting. And you have to be selective. You have to partner up with the partnership organizations where you're going to be able to have a maximum impact, whether you go through a community foundation or other funding that will deliver capacity to a far greater number of constituents. And so if we need the liquidity and preserve it now in order to help them in a deeper need down the road, then that's the type of playbook and decision making that we have to coach them through. It's helping them make hard decisions and be better decision makers, not necessarily good decisions, but better decision makers.
Got it. Efren, Elmer, I want to come back to you, especially with your role as board members. Tricia, I'm actually going to go over to you. Is a lot of your consulting, a lot of your area expertise is helping different companies, businesses communicate to companies. What are you saying to companies? What do clients need to hear right now that business need to be communicating to their clients?
Well, in the same way that like in our daily lives, our daily lives, our normal routines kind of are off kilter. So I would say the same thing is consistent with companies. Like marketing as usual and communication as usual just doesn't really fit anymore. The first thing, hopefully companies have already done this. The first thing we're telling everyone is like, stop your marketing automation, because any emails that you have auto going out, like they don't really make sense to anymore. So it really feeds into having an audience lens, like being able to assess what your clients, your customers, the people within your realm of influence, what they're dealing with right now, what topics are top of mind for them, and any sort of message that you're sending them, how it's going to filter into their mind. There's a lot of noise happening right now. And from a market perspective, people are spending, they are reading emails more at this time. But you want to be both authentic and responsible to that. Not filling up, it's okay to be present and to be part of their world at this time, but it's not okay to claim importance or to expect high level of importance right now. So really balancing that is something that we've been helping our clients with. Another thing leads into our funding conversation. A lot of small businesses, we also work with a lot of startups that, are looking for growth through funding, and the venture capital world, the angel investment world is shifting a lot in this time as well. We believe that innovation and technology advancement is going to be moving forward, but for sure, how you receive funding is going to look different. We're guiding people in 3 ways that I think also could have personal applications. We're looking at better proving out financial scenarios and in proof of your financials, testing assumptions that you have in marketplace adoption. And third is crisis awareness. Like, do we have a plan? Elmer mentioned like another round of COVID coming through. Yes, that, but also any type of crisis. Investors right now are peaked awareness of that and how that can affect the market. So having a plan in place for what that could look like in a scenario planning is another thing that we're really focused on.
Got it. Last question. I know all of you guys have to run. Pastor as well as Ephraim, both of you guys have been on boards, and then from that point, you have all of this staff you're overseeing. Ephraim, you also have a church staff. How do you balance business and the spiritual care of your employees? And coming from a board members, some of the people here that are listening on this call are board members in organizations in their own countries. During this period of time, you will naturally have to make some cuts. How do you care about your employees, making sure that they are taken care of financially from a board perspective versus making hard decisions that organization has to make? Ephraim, I'm going to go to you, and then from that point, Elmer.
Man, you saved the easiest question for last. Wow. Well, one, I want to start at the beginning of your question in terms of just tending to your staff, shepherding, leading, serving a staff. And so an organization's ability to thrive is deeply tied to the flourishing of their staff, of their employees. So if your employees are not empowered, if your employees are not flourishing, it's going to impact a company, an organization, a church's ability to thrive, to meet its mission, to fulfill its purpose. And so during this shelter-in-place season, we've encouraged our staff to continue to be fruitful and faithful in their work responsibilities, but also to prioritize their relationship with God and to prioritize their families, to prioritize their self-care, to take ownership of their health, So we tried to say, hey, we're just because you're working from home, we're not on a staycation, and so we're working, but we also want you to be healthy. Health over growth. The next piece is, yes, we have worked on, as a senior team, we have worked on a series of plans, scenarios, if we had to lay off staff. We've been fortunate at this point. We haven't had to do that, but we have looked at ways that we may have to temporarily lay off people that we would want to bring back, and ways that we would have to resize our ministry, our church, in light of our finances. And I feel for faith-based organizations and churches right now, because those that were already at a critical moment, those that were already on decline, there could be some ministries that will not survive this season, and that's why I think it's important for the church to be as collaborative as it can be. That's why we're working in partnership right now with other churches in our community, because we can't approach the social isolation with spiritual isolation. And so that's the best way I could respond to that question.
Got it. Good. Elmer, thoughts for you as a board member of different organizations?
So I think, spending some time with the NAVs finance team most recently, we went through a little bit of an exercise of this, and part of it was what I was describing earlier about a sort of a game plan, defensive, offensive playbook, being asked the questions and assessing what the scenarios could play out. But I don't think that there's a real easy answer to this question, other than ensuring that you're integrating the intentionality, the authenticity that Tricia talks about, the spiritual missional component that Ephraim referenced just now. You have to have this completely integrated, and there are hard decisions that people make. And as board members, your job is to walk alongside your management teams, your leaders, to help them understand that everything at this point is around relationships. Mm-hmm. Relationships has driven this economy in many different forms, and that's what makes these decisions harder in terms of potential layoffs, furloughs, whatever you need to do, or even just outright firings. It's not going to be easy, and the more that you can come with a humble heart and with sufficient hope and support for those that you work with, because as a board member, you work for the people that are in the organization. The NAVs have over 4,000 staff people globally, and they're investing in other people, and that's all relationship driven. So, and all the foundations and the churches, such as what Ephraim's leading, they do need shepherding. They need people to give them a sense of hope. We're in a time period right now where there's a lot of uncertainty. And one of our pastors that I listened to a couple of weeks ago basically said that there is no faith without uncertainty, and there's no courage without fear. And so we need to keep proper perspective, help people to keep that perspective, give the spiritual component, and pray for them, and walk alongside them physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Got it. Thank you. Well, I really want to make sure I got a perspective from Tricia, who's a marketplace leader, Elmer, who's been in the marketplace, but now on the ministry funding side. And Pastor, you've been working with World Impact, and now you are a co-pastor of a church over at Sacramento. So thank you for your perspective. Thank you for speaking into the lives of people here in the States, but also in Asia and Africa. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
And for more episodes of Up Next, go to resourceglobal.org. And for Chicago NAVs, go to chicagonavs.org. So thank you, guys. Have a good day.
Stay well.
Talk soon.
Thank you.
Be well.
Bye.